There was no existence. There was no non-existence. No sky above, not a speck that moved. What was hidden? Where? What gave shelter? And to whom? Was there water, which was unimaginably deep? There was no death. There was no life. No sign of day or night. There was no wind. That one breathed by its own impulse. Apart from that, there was nothing else. Darkness was wrapped in darkness. Everything was water without boundaries. That one, hidden, emerged by its own tapas. Then in its mind arose immense desire. This was the first seed for thought. The wise poets saw the connection between the existent and the non-existent. The radiance of that one previously hidden now began to spread everywhere. Seed givers and great forces came about. Behind them was impulse, followed by effort. Who really knows? Who can say it now when it was created and how it happened? The gods came only later. Who then knows how all this happened? Who then knows when it first came into being? How did all this come into existence? Did he create it or did he not? He who sees it all from high above, he knows it or he does not. These are lines from the Nasadiya Sukta, a beautiful poem on creation from the Rig Veda Samhita, which is the oldest known treatise in the world. While the Vedas represent the earliest literature of the Hindu civilization, the dawn of our culture must have been far earlier, because the language itself must have evolved for so many years before it reached the kind of sophistication and sensitivity that we see in the Rig Veda Samhita. As we know from human history, in the early days, man was a hunter-gatherer. Over time, from a nomadic hunter, he settled down in a certain place, began domesticating wild animals, began cultivation. Farmers began growing different kinds of crops. They began exchanging them because of the growing needs, the growing population. Then this led to a life of full-fledged trade and agricultural produce. Once trade started, there was a necessity for law and order. Once there was law and order, there was a possibility of leisure. There was a security all around. There was certain social order. This gave people opportunity to engage in the arts, in philosophy, and in fundamental thinking. So therefore, we have to come to a conclusion that the people who composed the Vedas, the great rishis and rishikas, they must have been comfortably placed in order to compose these kind of wonderful songs and poems. They must have had filled stomachs. They must have had security. If they were not comfortable, if they were fighting for survival, combating nature, combating animals, they could not have composed this kind of poetry. And because of this, we can surmise that they were a very advanced culture. Now, when we come to creation, why do we bother about creation? Why do we care about creation of the universe? Because we care about the creation of human beings. We care to know where we came from, because we are interested in our own existence. When we strike a balance between observing nature, which is inquiry, and contemplating about nature, and on the other side, when we feel the whole of creation, which is enjoyment, then we find ourselves, we find our place in the scheme of things, balancing between inquiry and enjoyment. Now, when we think about the origin of our universe, many questions come to our mind. Was it created or was it always there? If it was created, when was it created? Who created it? How did this creation happen? Who was responsible for this creation? Now, the ancient Indians who created the oldest civilization known to humans today, they too pondered about these topics and gave certain suggestions, certain ideas in the poems of the Vedas. Now, this is not unique to India. This kind of thinking about creation we see in every culture, whether you go to China, or you go to the Mayans, the ancient people of Australia, Pima Indians, the Basari people of West Africa, or the Nordic cultures. So many places around the world we have creation stories. Similarly, we have creation stories in the different religions, whether it is Jainism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Sikhism. All these religions have said something or the other about creation. And many of these ancient cultures, especially what we call the pagan cultures, they visualized creation as creation of the world as seen around them. So their geography played a great role in their visualization of creation. And the interesting thing is, most of the cultures around the world, they have one creation story or maybe two creation stories. But in the Vedas, we find more than 30 different creation stories, creation songs. And what is beautiful is not just that these are numerous. We have so many stories about creation, but they are very varied. It is not a similar kind of story. Every one of these stories has a very different, unique flavor. But it also has an underlying oneness. It has a consistency in the deeper philosophy. Now, not only are these poems of creation numerous and varied, but they are also profound. Now, this is not a very easy thing to do. When we look at the ancient people, they must have been so observant and so sensitive in order to capture these ideas, and also so open to share multiple viewpoints on the same subject. And this we find extended much more in the Itihasas and Puranas and Darshanas. We are talking only about the Vedic corpus, we have about 30 creation songs. But if we take the larger corpus, there is so much more to explore. Now, the underlying theme of Hindu creation is oneness. Again and again we find that one became everything. The whole of creation has arisen from a single source. This is a very common theme in all the creation hymns. Now, the variety of these creation hymns, they cater to human minds at different levels and different stages of spiritual development. So, the multiplicity of these poems is very much aligned with the plurality that is so typical of Sanatana Dharma. And these multiple poems also suggest very strongly that we have to pay attention to the underlying message and not to the form of the work. If we had only one creation story, then we would bend over backwards to try and take some scientific theory and fit it into this one existing creation hymn or creation story. But since we have so many, we have not just taken the word, but we also considered the theme, we have considered the message, we have considered the metaphor, and so many layers of meaning we have tried to understand, and we are free to discard a theory if we don't like it. So, it is very important for us to recognize that in comparison with the Semitic way of looking at the world, a Hindu can look at the creation poems and enjoy the metaphor without being bogged down by the scientific plausibility of this. So that is the reason why a true Hindu can be both religious and secular all at once. And there is no conflict in his mind between science and religion, between Darwin's theory of evolution and the Nasadiya Sukta, for example. Both these things can happily exist in his world. The Hindu view is that rather than creation, it was Srishti, pouring forth, an expansion. Rather than the universe proceeding from God, the Hindus feel that the universe itself is God. So if you pose a question to a Hindu, does God exist? He might laugh and say only God exists. Because the universe and the divine are inseparable to a Hindu. Everything is a manifestation of Brahman, which is a supreme being, all pervasive. And there is no clear distinction made between the creation and the creator. In fact, in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, there is a beautiful verse that says, one who truly understands this creation becomes a creator of the creation. One who understands Brahman becomes Brahman. So that possibility of oneness with the creator is something that is very beautiful in the Hindu worldview. Another interesting difference we see between the Hindu view of creation and the Judeo-Christian model is that in India we see time as cyclical, whereas in the Semitic tradition time is seen as a linear thing. So there is a past, present, future. But here we see time as cyclical. So after there is Srishti, Sthiti, Laya, then there is Srishti again. So there is a cosmic cycle that is envisaged in our tradition. And Srishti can start at a very, very basic level. Every morning when we wake up, there is Srishti. As we spend our day doing various activities, that is Sthiti. When we go to bed, it is Laya. Again, next morning, there is Srishti. So like this, our reality is born in the morning, it sustains during the day, and it dies in the end of the day, and again next morning. Because we see the world through our senses and the mind. And as far as we are the point of reference, the world exists only when we are conscious of the world. When we see the world, it is there. If I close my eyes, it doesn't exist. So it is not something that is out there, but it is something which is within. And because our reality exists within the realm of our awareness. Now, even if you bring it down to a moment, every moment something is born, something dies. A new thought is born, a thought dies. Our awareness shifts from one thing to the another, the former dies, a new thing is born. So like this, there is constant change. And what is the point of reference for this change? It is we. The self is the point of reference for this constant change. In the similar way, a month is born, a month dies. The moon goes through a phase of 15 days from new moon to full moon, and again goes back to new moon. So like this, days and months and weeks, years, century, millennia, all these things are born and they die. So we see that constant change, that cycle of Srishti, Sthiti, Laya at all points of time. Even within the lifetime of one person, at a certain epiphanic moment, the old self dies and a new self is born. Somebody had a certain strong ideology at one point of time in his life. With a new awakening, suddenly it changes to something else. A new person is born. In fact, for example, when we do the Upanayana Samskara, we say Dvija, twice born. He is born once again. First was a physical birth, but then the birth of knowledge, the birth of a person in the spiritual realm, in the realm of wisdom. So we see this birth and death not just as a physical birth and physical death, but also in a larger scale as well as a smaller scale. So there is this continuous cycle of coming into being and dissolving. In fact, in one of the poems of the Rig Veda, there is a beautiful verse, just as before the Creator made sun, moon, sky, earth and space. So it is not that creation happened at one point and everything proceeded from that and it will end at a certain point. So creation is seen as something that is happening constantly. It is cyclical, it is eternal, it is beginningless, it is endless. So when somebody understands it from this point of view of Srishti as an expansion, as pouring forth, Sthiti as a maintenance or a balance, and Laya as a dissolution, as a withdrawal, as a disappearance, and then we find that there is a beautiful continuous process which is beginningless and endless. Now we go to the Vedic corpus. It is useful to learn about a little bit about the structure of the Vedas. So initially, as people had beautiful ideas, they would record that in the form of a verse because it is easy to remember, and in the oral tradition which was passed on for several millennia, it was easier to remember when it is something composed in a meter rather than a line of prose. So they composed everything naturally in meter, and in the Sanskrit language also it is suitable to compose in meter. So initially it would have been just a body of knowledge composed by different rishis and rishikas, men and women seers, and over time this would have got accumulated over so many centuries and become a large body of knowledge. And according to our tradition, we believe it was Krishna Dvaipana Vyasa, who is also the composer of the Mahabharata. He was called Krishna Dvaipayana because he was dark in color and born on an island. But he also came to be called as Veda Vyasa because he was the one who divided all these hymns into different Vedic groups, and we have 4 Vedas. So traditionally we see the Rig Veda, which is the oldest. The Rig is something like a poem. Then Saman is where the poem is sung, it's a song, and Yajus is a lot of prose passages are there. So in any form of language, the 3 fundamental modes of expression are poetry, song and prose. So this corresponds to Rig, Saman and Yajus. Also we can look at Rig as the lyric, Saman as the song and Yajus as a dance. So where there is a lyric, there is a song and there is dance. So this is a kind of connectedness between the 3 Vedas. Now of course later on the works of sage Atharvan and also Angirasa created the Atharva Veda. So then we have 4 Vedas, and each of the Vedas have subdivisions. First comes the Samhita portion. Now Samhita portion largely deals with bhakti, devotional poems. Then we have the Brahmanas, which deal a lot with the Karma Kanda, a lot of the ritualistic aspects which connect with karma. Then the Aranyakas are more forest treatises where people, when they moved to the forest, they meditated. So it relates more to dhyana. And the Upanishads is about knowledge. It relates to jnana. Of course, we must remember that these are not watertight compartments. In the Samhitas, you will find certain things which relate to jnana. In the Brahmanas, you will find certain philosophy, certain meditative aspects. You will find in the Aranyakas certain philosophical explanation for what you see in the Brahmanas. So these are not watertight compartments, but for the sake of understanding, we may largely classify them into devotion, ritual, meditation and wisdom. And in some sense, if you see, it also roughly corresponds to the Chaturashrama which we have of Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanaprastha and Sannyasa. Brahmacharya is a studenthood, Grihastha is the life of a householder, Vanaprastha is retiring from active social life, and Sannyasa is complete renunciation of all desires and meditating on the self. Now the essence of the Vedas lies in celebration of life as Ananda. That is the essence of the Veda. Its conception of universal order, which is called Rita. Its quest for the meaning of life and its attempt to realize the ultimate truth. This is what we see in the Vedas. And the rishis and rishikas, almost they are the same word has been used for rishi and kavi. A poet and a seer are not seen as 2 different things. And what we see is all these rishis, they compose their poems in a very metaphorical way, because the kind of topics that they are dealing with are so difficult, so sophisticated to understand. It is very difficult to pinpoint and say it in very clear terms. It is very speculative, very it's a quest of discovery, of trying to understand, not a pronouncement. So the common factor in all the Vedic poems, or at least many of the Vedic poems, is the indirect way of expression. Not a direct expression, suggestive and indirect. And the fantastic imagination of the people, how they visualize creation in so many various ways. And another thing we find is their attempt at trying to integrate ideas that might be seemingly contradictory, but they have a deeper oneness, they have a deeper samanvaya. And also what they did very successfully is they transcended dry logic, because some of these things they realized was that it is difficult to go there with logic and reason. It is very intuitive and one has to realize it rather than work it out in a methodical way. And this could be achieved only by poetry. It could not be achieved by a manual for creation or a law of creation or a Big Bang theory. Because if they had tried to do something like a Big Bang theory or some scientific law, it would have been disproved by their next generation. It would have been disproved by other thinkers. So when it was metaphorical, it was possible for them to capture ideas and retain it because they are still value today. Whereas if they had done something like a law, then it would have got outdated, it would not even have reached us. And even if it did reach us, we would not be interested because we have much more advanced science today than what we have in the Vedic times, obviously. So instead of articulating what they thought, they expressed what they felt. That is the big difference between the Vedic times and the mindset of poets as opposed to the modern world of technology and science, where it is more about articulation. And even today, a poet expresses what he or she feels. Now, this deep awareness of the multiple layers of understanding meant that the ancient Indians and the Indian tradition never saw great conflict between science and religion, or faith and ethics, or science and faith, or rituals and rationality. These were never conflicting because they understood in different levels of meaning. And this magnanimous worldview is the fountainhead of all the harmony and the mutual nourishment we see in our tradition. Because the ancient Indians, they realized that using reason is very futile. And this they did not do by abhorring reason or by imposing faith. They must have toiled a lot on the path of reason, and when they failed to understand it through reason, through logic, at that point of time they might have gone beyond that and tried to find something more general and more natural. And we see such fine sensitivity in their thought process. And when I see different layers of meaning, so this is expressed in the Upanishads, we have 3 levels of meaning. One is the Adhibhuta, then Adhidaiva and Adhyatma. So Adhibhuta refers to the material world, all the knowledge which is at the material world. Now there is a table, it is made of wood, or we see something in front of us, there is an animal, it is from this species, this genus and so on. So all the scientific facts, all the aspects that deal with the material world, we put it under Adhibhuta. Adhidaiva is something that corresponds to our emotion. So this might be a table made of wood and has all these physical properties. But if it is a gift to me from my grandfather, there is a certain emotional connect to this particular table. For a scientist, it makes no difference whether it is this table or something that was manufactured along with this in a factory at the same time. It is identical to a scientist. For somebody who has an emotional connect with that table, that goes into the emotional realm, which is something to do with, not to do with material, but to do with feelings. Then the third is Adhyatma, which corresponds to our inner being, which corresponds to the individual. It works at the realm of the individual. So in the introduction to the book which I co-wrote on Srishti, Shatabdhani Dr. Ganesh has given a beautiful introduction and introductory essay in which he explains these 3 epistemologies of Adhibhuta, Adhidaiva and Adhyatma. He gives a wonderful example. You take the sun. For a scientist, sun is a star. It is made up of 75% hydrogen and helium. It is 100 times bigger than the earth or some, it has these properties, it is 8 light minutes away and so on and so on. So these are all technical aspects about the sun. It is the center of the solar system and so on, which is true. Now that is in the realm of physics, in the realm of the material world. When it moves from Adhibhuta to Adhidaiva, then it becomes Aditya, Savitra, the deity of the sun, which is giving us light and which is giving us warmth, which is the reason why there is life on earth and so on. So there is a reverential aspect to the same sun. The object has not changed, it is the way we are looking at it now. It is suddenly totally different at an emotional level. When that moves to the Adhyatma level, then what happens is, to recognize the sun, to recognize the light of the sun, I must have light within. I must have consciousness, awareness, intelligence to understand that consciousness of the sun. So here we bring it to the realm of the individual. And a connected idea to this is Adhiyajna, which is the ritualistic aspect that connects the Adhidaiva to the Adhyatma. Now that could be like a Sandhya Vandana, where we are offering prayer to the sun. It's a ritualistic process that is meant to take us from the emotional aspect to the transcendental aspect. Now because of this understanding, the Vedic seers, they realized that the only way to overcome the fear of death is to plunge headlong into life. They never felt that the world is a curse or it's a conflict or that it's filled with suffering or we have to fight with nature. They accepted the world with its pleasures and pains, with its highs and lows. They did not abhor the world, instead they embraced the world with its joys and its sorrows. They were able to convert even a day-to-day mundane activity into something special, something spiritual, something sacred, something beautiful. Because when you are doing something in a mundane level, we can only sustain for a certain amount of time. But when suddenly there's an emotional aspect brought to it, then we are able to sustain that activity for a longer time. So that was the reason the Vedic seers gave so much of importance to celebration of life, to looking at the entire universe with such admiration and such affection, that there was no opportunity to feel any petty thoughts that we see in every line of the Veda. Now, a couple of ideas we see constantly recurring. One is Brahman, which is the supreme spirit and which is beyond creation and dissolution. Then three other concepts: Rita, Satya, Dharma. Rita is a cosmic order. It is the divine law that governs the universe. And it refers to the dynamism which is inherent in the universe. Satya means truth. It is a simple word, but it has a very wide range of meanings: objectivity, virtue, honesty in thought, speech and deed, authenticity and so on. Now, Dharma is that which supports everything. Dharma refers to sustainability. It is the harmony in the universe which sustains the greater good. And it has again several meanings like righteousness and way of life, duty, moral principle and so on. Now, in the commentary on the Vedas, Sayana, one of the brilliant polymaths of the 14th century, he says that Rita can be compared to a noble thought, Satya can be compared to a noble word, and Dharma can be compared to a noble deed. So this is the beautiful connection between these three concepts. Now we come to the creation according to the Vedas. So the poems, songs and stories about creation in the Vedas are numerous and diverse. While some of them are very speculative in nature, like the Nasadiya Sukta, some are very definitive. The Vedas speak about creation from a certain source in some of the hymns, maybe from Brahman, from non-existence, from existence, time, water, from yajna or from tapas and so on. We have the famous Hiranyagarbha Sukta from the golden embryo, then we have the Skamba Sukta from the cosmic pillar, then we have the Uchishta Sukta from the ultimate reminder, and this way we have so many such creation hymns from a certain source. Purusha Sukta from Purusha, the cosmic person, and so on. Then they also talk about creation from by the union of the male and female creative principle. This is another very common theme. Then certain creation hymns refer to a deity who takes charge of the creation, like the Purusha Sukta again. Vishwakarma Sukta we have, then Prajapati is responsible for the creation, Brahma is responsible, Indra is responsible and so on. Then some of the creation poems deal with the creation of deities like Purusha, creation of time, creation of human body, creation of death, creation of food, creation of speech, so various aspects. Then we also find certain other stories of creation like Manu and the great flood, the death and revival of Prajapati. So like this we have so many different kinds of creation stories in the Vedas. Now a common theme in the Vedic creation stories, like I said earlier, is that one became everything. Now apart from this common idea, we also see certain motifs. For example, the connection between the Brahmanda and the Pindanda, the macrocosm and the microcosm. So some of the hymns talk about how from the microcosm, the macrocosm came into being. Some of them talk about how the macrocosm gave birth to the microcosm. We have this kind of motif. Another common motif, like I said, is the union of the male and female creative principle. So the male principle is Purusha, the female principle is Virat. or the male principle is Daksha and the female principle is Aditi, or male principle is Prana and the female principle is Rai. So by these two things coming together, there is a creation. Another motive we see is what we call the Bija Vriksha Nyaya, or the egg and chicken paradox. So who came first, whether it was a seed or whether it was a tree? So one of the poems in the Purusha Sukta, from Purusha comes Virat and from Virat comes Purusha. Then another one says Daksha was born to Aditi, Aditi was born to Daksha. So when you look at this as a metaphor, it is so beautiful, which talks about the difficulty of saying which came first. But unfortunately, some of the people, in a view to distort it, they want to say that Daksha was, had a child from his daughter who is Aditi, or vice versa. It is not to be taken literally. It is to be taken metaphorically, that it is impossible to say who came first. That is the idea, rather than trying to give a very literal meaning to it, which really doesn't make too much of sense. So unless we understand the metaphor, and we see these metaphors all through the Vedas, and once you understand the metaphor, you can apply it everywhere. It is not based on the whims and fancies of the interpreter, but it is something which we see in the Vedic text. So the different aspects of nature are used as a metaphor. Sun, moon, elements, directions, water, fire, seasons, day and night, animals, trees, all these are used as metaphors. Then we see that the activities of agriculture, they are used as metaphors. The sowing of the seeds, the cultivation, harvest, milching, these are all used as different aspects in a creation hymn. The different components of a yajna, which is the Vedic fire ritual, typically they will have a square shaped altar made of bricks and a circular shaped and semicircular shaped 3 Agnis. And so the fire altar, and then the sacred fire, which Agni, and then the Idma, Havis, all these aspects, the Ajya, these are all taken as metaphor for different aspects of creation. The parts of the body are used as different aspects, the elements of nature, and numbers. We find a lot of fascination with numbers. 1 Brahman, then 2 sexes, 3 worlds, 4 Varnas, 5 Pranas, 6 seasons, Shadrutu, Saptarishi, Ashtavasu, like this, so many different play on numbers. So when we see this metaphorical aspect and try to move beyond the Adhibhuta level, because in the Vedic poems on creation, they are really not talking about Adhibhuta level, because that is what our scientists today all over the world are trying to understand, how the universe was created, the Big Bang theory, whether it is 4 billion years old or 15 billion years. These are all things which are even now being studied. Constantly new information is coming and we cannot be sure about it. So they did not deal with that aspect at all. They went mostly for the deeper philosophy of creation, how we are able to connect that understanding of creation to the Adhyatma level. So the underlying principle that they were trying to teach is that we are all children of the same fundamental parent. Our origins can be traced to a single source. We are members of the same family, not in a philosophical sense alone, not in a poetic sense alone, but also really, practically, we are all from a original source. So this kind of connectedness they were able to teach. And once somebody understands this reality, once it becomes clear that we are all coming from a common source, then it is very difficult to enjoy ruthlessly at the cost of somebody else, because then we begin to see the other person also as our own family member. We cannot enjoy at the cost of somebody else's trouble, somebody else's pain. This is the kind of learning. We have to nourish the whole of existence, we have to nourish each other, and any gift we receive should be received with gratitude. So this is the kind of mindset that the Vedic rishis and rishikas were able to impart in these creation hymns. And we started out with trying to understand creation of the universe. And where did we land up? With a wholesome attitude to appreciate the world around us, to be more compassionate to fellow human beings, to be mindful of the natural environment around us, and to understand the transient nature of the universe, how things change. And real Srishti is from within. And when we realize this reality, how can somebody be a stranger? How can somebody be another? How can we hate anybody? There is divine presence in everybody, and there is an all-pervasive Brahman, and that is what binds all of us. This is the great learning when we try to embark on understanding Srishti. In the preparation of this talk, a lot of material has been taken from a book that I co-wrote with Dr. Koti Sri Krishna. I'd like to express my gratitude towards Shatavadhani Dr. R. Ganesh, who extensively helped Dr. Koti Sri Krishna and me in the preparation of this collection of poems from the Vedas. And I also like to thank my co-author for a lot of inputs that he gave me through the course of the book, which I have used in preparation of this lecture today. Thank you so much.